Welcome to the Renegade Report. I'm Jonathan.
And Ramon is present, and the prodigal son returns.
Yes, but you did a great podcast, so
thank you.
that was a really good one, yeah.
Well, I mean, if the guest is good, the guest is good. You just said here, a podcast
It was a typical Ramon podcast, because it was like, just give him runway, and then he goes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A podcast is the easiest content to make in the world.
Yeah.
Well, it becomes easier over time.
Yeah.
But glad to have you back. And we've got
Thank
a
you.
great show today. But before we go to our guest, it's the State of the Nation address tonight. So by the time you hear this, it would have happened. And let's make 3 predictions of what's going to happen. Jonathan, you can go first.
Well, before we make the predictions, can we just say the State of the Nation is shit? So that's, that's all that he really needs to come and say is, hi, I'm President Cyril Ramaphosa, and the State of the Nation is shit. We will try and do something about it, but it's unlikely we will succeed. Thank you. And he should walk away. That shouldn't cost 4 million rand. But predictions about what he will say. Our tax collections have been good, but we haven't collected enough tax, and therefore we're going to have to collect more tax in some way or other. I expect they'll add tax onto capital gains, or they'll remove tax from your medical aid.
That's more than the budget
stuff and all that kind of stuff. No, but something will be mentioned.
Right.
And yourself?
I think they're going to double down on EWC.
Yep.
And they're going to double down on NHI, and they're going to promise that Eskom will be solved. And I think that's about it, really.
Okay, so that's state ownership of the means of production and healthcare.
But it'll be better.
Yeah, well, of course it'll be better. It always
state-owned.
gets better, Ramon. It always gets better. I mean, that's how communism works. Every time you try it, every time it's tried and fails, when you try it again, it gets better and doesn't fail, as we know from history.
Indeed. Indeed. But talking about communism or discrimination, our guest today is not a discriminatory person, but Shando Theron, divorce attorney, but that's only a little bit of the full picture. Mr. Theron, welcome, sir.
Oh, thank you, darling. Good to be here.
For those who are wondering, should I mention on air what we do together?
The part with the leather and the whips, or
just the work? Just the work.
Just the
sticks to the work.
Well, I'll just mention it. Ramon's been divorced 4 times, and I've done 3 of them. But no, that's about it.
No, so we are gym partners, and we've known each other for about 2.5 years now.
You go to the box, bro?
Go to the CrossFit box, but we spot each other.
Great, all right.
And hold each other very tightly under pressure.
Good. Yes. I'm glad I'm not close to the camera then. At least the muscles are near the camera. It looks better. Yeah.
But seriously, though, it's a very serious issue. And the serious issue is divorce law and, more importantly, fathers' rights in South Africa. So now, divorce law is what you do, but you have specializations that we need to discuss. And what are those?
Well, the specialization, and I always struggle with that word, is that in divorce law, I'm a specialist divorce attorney, but in that I have a further specialization, which is custody for fathers. Fathers get a really, really rough deal in the custody courts. And further than that, or akin to that, is disputed relocations. We usually, 99.999% of the time, the mother meets somebody on the internet, falls madly in love with them. A relationship has 4 phases, but because of internet dating and Facebook and things like that, phases 1 to 3 you can now do over the internet. You can meet somebody, get to know them, fall madly in love with them, and do everything but consummate the actual relationship. And you can do that over the internet. And that is enough for people to want to uproot their lives, the lives of their children, move to a foreign country without having met the person, and then take the children away, pull the rug out from under the children. The children have their school, their friends, their family as a support structure, the father's family as a support structure. Yeah, and the mother on a whim now wants to relocate the children to Australia is a big one, New Zealand is another, England is another, and Canada is more and more popping up on the horizon. Those are the big ones.
So fathers' rights, it's a bit of a touchy issue in South Africa, because we know for a fact that I think 67% of children born are born out of wedlock or born to a single mother, or they can't find a father. But then on the other hand, if they are born to 2 parents, a mother and a father, there's a presumption in law that the mother knows what is best for that child.
Well, if you look at the Constitution, Roman, firstly, you cannot discriminate based on sex. So apparently to the Constitution. And then in line with that, the rights of children, or the best interests of the child, is the uppermost right in the Constitution. It's held, or supposed to be held, in the total high regard, overrides everything, as it should be. So you can't discriminate based on sex, and the best interest of the child comes first. Right. So our esteemed courts have looked at this and come to the conclusion that based on that, there were two sort of doctrines that were part of our law, maternal preference and tender years doctrines that were part of our law. And they sort of mean the same thing, that if a child is very young, mother knows best. Child needs to be with mother. But there's been constitutional law court cases that have said, but you know what, that's not so. That part of raising a child, that nurturing aspect, men can be as good nurturers as women, sometimes even better, and that has been proven. So, but despite that, and the court saying that those presumptions do not form part of our law, I had a senior judge quote me the other day when we were asking for custody of a child, saying, but the child is of tender years. And you look at this person and you go, this is a competent judge, by the way, somebody I highly respect, but you look at them and you say, well, you can't say anything. You just look at them and not knowing what to say. Because the institutional memory, look, the courts are conservative in their thinking, and the courts are slow to change, and so they should be. They can't just change on a whim. They are the sort of the backbone, supposed to be the backdome, the fail-safe, the backstop of society. So they should be conservative in their thinking, and they should be slow in the way to change. But unfortunately, the institutional memory of the court where they've been stuck, and they've been stuck there far too long, is that the mother stays home and is the nurturer, and the father goes out and earns the bacon. I don't know of anybody where both parents are not working. So that viewpoint, that institutional memory of the mom being the nurturer, does not exist. Your children are being raised by someone else, either by a nanny or a family member or a creche. The mother, in very few occasions, has the luxury of staying home and looking after the children. And if she has the luxury of doing that, she generally farms it out to an au pair, because then they have enough money to do so. So the bottom line is this institutional memory of the mother being home and being the nurturer is very, very, very far removed from reality, but men are going heavy burden under that yoke, under that institutional memory. Even the way the Children's Act is drafted, Section 21, 2 parents, not married. The mother can be a heroin addict, but if she gave birth to that child, she has automatic parental rights and responsibilities. Us, as a father, have to go and prove our parental rights. That's just, what's that if it's not discrimination based on sex? I can be an accountant, tax-paying father with a stable job versus a transient heroin addict mother, but I have to go prove my rights. And it's not easy. So there's that institutional memory of how things used to be 60, 70, 100 years ago really is playing havoc on fathers. I do a lot of custody cases. And let's say you've got a mother and a father who are both working, both not bad people, both not perfect. And you paint a picture of a day in the life of the child. And the day in the life of the child with the father is better than of the mother. Let's say better neighborhood, better schools, slightly more affluent, better support system. Unless there's something seriously wrong with the mother, like some form of addiction or emotional issue or some institutionalization, you are going to have such a hard time. So the best interest of a child is not being looked at. That maternal preference, that tender years, if the child is young. And the whole thing is that the sort of thing that the courts sometimes jokingly say, yes, but a father can't breastfeed. Children are being raised on formula. That father will be able to buy more expensive and better formula for that child. Mothers are choosing not to breastfeed because they're so vain and they want their figures to remain intact. So this child will be raised on formula at either parent. My client, the father, will buy better formula, gold standard formula for the child. But that is completely ignored. The child is of tender years. So what happens now in reality is that the tender years and the maternal preference is being confused with the best interest of the child. And sometimes they're not in the best interest of the child. And that is where I'm fighting that fight, and it's like turning the Titanic, a little nudge at a time. But we're getting there.
What's the age of tender years? What is that sort of considered?
Sort of 0 to 3, the infant stage.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting. I'm a bit conflicted on the whole issue because my sort of, and it's not really conservative, I wouldn't say, but I have an issue with what has happened in society in terms of demonizing mothers. And this is not within law. I'm talking about in society as a whole. So we've done this thing where if you're a woman, you are a better person if you've gone and become like a lawyer and a partner at a law firm than you are if you've decided to stay at home, make a home for your family, look after kids, make that like what you do. And anyone with kids can tell you that that can be a full-time day job. And as you say, people who choose not to do that, and that is well within their rights, and I'm more than happy that people have those choices. But people who choose not to do that have to get someone else to do it in lieu of them. Your kids need to be looked after pretty much all the time. So I kind of am a bit conflicted in the sense that I do wish that we could get back to the point where we could say, yes, if you want to be the lawyer, the partner at the law firm, great. And that's what you want to do with your life, wonderful, that's good for you. But if you want to be a mother and that's what you want your job to be alone, you don't have to compartmentalize, that's cool too, and there's nothing looking down on you. So that's the one side of things. And I suppose you say the evidence shows that the fathers are just as good as the mothers. But I don't know, there's something... I'd have to go look at the evidence to be convinced.
You say there's something, and if I can paraphrase for you, there's something against the grain. It doesn't quite rub right.
I think certainly, and I do hear the tender years argument. It kind of something. Maybe it's just my indoctrination, and it's not based on data. But my indoctrination is, and it's not just what I've been told. It's kind of what I've seen as well. Mothers seem to be, especially in the early stages, just better nurturers. It's not that they're better parents. That's not. I don't think that's correct. But better nurturers. The kids, babies seem to want their moms more. Moms are a little bit more comforting in general than fathers. They are just that kind of aspect.
No, Jonathan, certainly on the face of it, there is that. You can look at how a father holds a child versus how a mother holds a child, the levels of patience. And all that, and the fact that the father is supposed to be the guy that goes out and gets the job and works. But now, there's been a real role reversal in society. And you say women being demonized, I go the other way. There's been a real attack on family values.
Yes.
There's been a real attack on masculinity. So my sort of gripe lies the other way. And you see, for instance, and I deal with this in my job a lot, you have women that go out there, climb the corporate ladder. It hasn't given them happiness. It's given them financial freedom. But there's more women out there on antidepressants, ridiculously unhappy, and men who also don't quite know where they fit in anymore.
Sure, and it hasn't made families better. I would agree with that.
It's made it worse. It's made my job more lucrative because that complete role reversal, that attack on family values, that being male is evil. Basically, but that's a sermon for another day. The bottom line here is that given the chance, especially with their own child, men can be phenomenal nurturers. Unfortunately, you and I come from a generation where cowboys don't cry, don't show your emotions. And I always joke about this. My father, and this is true, my father said there's only 2 times when it's okay for a man to cry. When the Springboks win and when the Springboks lose. But you understand, in that, many a truth is said in jest.
Yeah.
Ramon often cries when the Springboks lose.
I cry when they win, which isn't often, but it's better now.
I only cry when I'm forced to watch sports, to be fair. But Shando, just quickly, sorry, about masculinity, and that's interesting because I feel, especially on the internet, there's a rise of the sort of masculinity aspect to men. There's a large contingent of people online who are forming these communities where they say that men have been demonized, families have been demonized, and they're sort of trying to bring back the family to what we would call Judeo-Christian values, to our fathers being a provider, but not just a provider, also a carer for the child. And that seems to have grown in presence a lot on the internet in the past decade or so, I would argue. And do you feel, as a practicing attorney with clients who I suspect are fathers, has there been a fundamental change in the way fathers see their responsibilities to their children? Are they wanting to take a very proactive role more than before, or is it just a case of acknowledging that they exist in the first place?
I think it's a bit of both. I think a lot of fathers now are realizing that there's a constitution that says apparently you cannot be discriminated upon based on sex. Here's a Children's Act that says you have equal parental rights or joint parental rights and responsibilities. Now, if I have joint rights and you have joint rights, well, the logical conclusion is the rights should be equal. However, the courts are translating equal is in a 2-week cycle, the father can see the child for 2 days, maybe. Now, in my book, that's not equal.
Yes.
And fathers all over the world. You have the Fathers for Justice in the UK, which guys that dress themselves in superior costumes and tie themselves to the London Bridge and the Big Ben. It's a worldwide phenomenon. You know, we're expected to still provide money, but you've sort of got to trade it for access. And guys are getting fed up with that. They're saying, right, you know what, why don't we have 1 week rotating? We stay close to each other. The child doesn't have to go to different school. 1 week here, 1 week there. What's the big deal?
Yeah.
You know, now you want me to have supervised access to my children, but before I was staying with them 24/7 and you were in the house with me and there was no supervision necessary. Why now suddenly? I think guys are just getting fed up with the techniques or tactics that are being employed by women, especially if they don't get their way with maintenance and especially if they potentially don't get their way with custody. Then you have all these little things coming out, you know, all these little accusations or muddying the water, things that you can't really disprove. But coming back to the whole masculinity thing, there is a real movement where guys are saying enough. Where every time they look on television and they get shown a guy wearing makeup and a dress, and this is being told to their sons that this is what a man looks like. That guy who's not married, doesn't have a family, doesn't step up, takes his responsibility seriously as a man. That this is now what the new value system for men are. I think guys are getting a problem with that because those people that their children are being taught to aspire to, you know what? A lot of guys are saying that's not for me. If you want to live that way and you want to be that way, sure, be it. But don't ram it down my throat and don't go telling my son that that's what you're supposed to be to feel good about being a man.
Yeah, never trust a male feminist is our motto on the show. And we
Well, I mean, it's what, like 2 days since a male feminist was caught doing something dodgy. So
Only two.
Yeah, well, don't worry, the clock gets reset every 3 days or so.
Two women, not two like things, two women.
Yeah. No, to the women they supposedly want to protect. Look, I'm on your page on a lot of that stuff. It's anyone who's been through divorce, certainly, I went through this sort of process as a kid, and the system is entirely, from my perspective, and certainly other people I know as well, is, as you say, biased towards the woman, towards the mother, on the assumption that it almost seems like the ground level assumption is. If we have to make an assumption starting off, then the child goes to the mother automatically.
Yes.
And then we start clawing back a little bit and deciding what the father can get.
Yes.
Certainly that was in my case. And it does also seem that the kids become pawns to the lawyers often.
Yes.
Whereby, okay, so we have a divorce to sort out between two adults, but we know that the father has X, Y, and Z in assets, or we know what we want to get out of him from, this would be the mother's lawyer's side. And I suppose this can happen in reverse too.
Let's trade access for custody.
Exactly.
Let's trade access for money.
Yeah, and look, I think you must tell us more about all of this, but the maintenance side of things also seems to have a number of issues because. So school fees, for example, are easy because if you're going to say the father's going to pay school fees, he earns far more than the mother, and that agreement, that's fine because it's a transfer directly into a bank account for school fees. But what can also happen is this sort of, you must pay the mother 20,000 Rand a month to look after the kid, right? And there's no way of proving that that's what the cost really. I mean, you can sort of sit down and do some fancy accounting, but it's very creative accounting. And what ends up happening is you may be paying 20,000 Rand to look after your kid, or maybe mom's taking holidays.
Okay. First, I disagree with you there. If you look at Section 15 of the Maintenance Act, it says quite clearly what maintenance is to be used for.
Okay.
You've got maintenance has three main sections.
Okay.
Consumables, water, lights, electricity, portion of bond or rent, and basically clothes. Things that you use up and don't have too much to show for it. That's a consumable portion. The non-custodial parent, usually the father, pays a portion thereof to the custodial parent, which is usually the mother. But usually, and once again, I have a problem with that. Secondly, and try the children staying with the father, the maintenance that the person gets from the mother is so much less. So even there, I mean, just
There's
the
a
thought
discrimination.
of the children, the mother paying to the father, that it's like the courts of a meltdown. They can't envision that. It's just a simple principle. The non-custodial parent pays to the custodial parent. And now that the custodial parents are becoming more and more the fathers, that I can take that very same fact and I'd get a much higher amount for the mom. It's like the courts just can't get their heads around.
So how are they working it out?
Well, I'll tell you how they work that out. So you've got your consumables, then you've got your education. Your education is the biggest one. It's school fees, stationery, which can include an iPad, which does include an iPad, by the way. Stationery, school uniforms, which is 2 winter, 2 summer, 1 tracksuit and sports clothes. Then you've got extramurals equipment. And since this is Santon, your child is not normal unless their therapists have therapists. So there's that. And then there's extra lessons and school tours. So that's the biggest bulk of it. And then you've got medical, which is medical aid and costs not covered by medical aid. So those are the 3 main portion if your child doesn't have a serious defect or anything like that, which requires specialist care, special medical attention. So you can work that out. That's a line item. You say, right, okay, our groceries are 10 grand a month. We're 3 people living in the house. 3.33. You divide it by 3, sort of. That's easy. Electricity is 2 grand a month. Divide by 3. Okay, school fees. Well, it's a line item. It's this much for this child. Extramurals, this much. Extramural equipment, this much. So you tally up the cost, the reasonable cost for the child. Now, there's always a question about what's reasonable, and that's education. It's always a fight. Is it private versus public? What? But that's a sermon for another day. So you can work out what the child costs a month. Now, how do you divide that? How do you portion that between the parents? So what you do is the following. You look at what the father makes, payslip. You look at what the mother makes, payslip. And a lot of times the mother makes more than the father these days, or very comparable. And then, based on that income differential, let's say the one person, you look at the total bundle, you put together what they make.
60-40.
60-40, so it's 50-50, 60-40, 70-30, 20, 80-20, 10-10 or 100 if the person isn't making anything at the moment. But even that has a sunshine clause. You can't just sit at home, play Xbox and smoke weed all day. You've actually got to get up and go have a job or be gainfully employed. So that then gets divided based on that income differential in those percentages that you just said. Now, it could either be cash or I pay the service provider directly, which is the best. I had a case a couple of years ago with a father who was working in Mauritius, was paying huge amounts to the mother to pay the school fees. She then neglected to pay the school fees and kept the money for herself, and her and her boyfriend went on vacation with it.
Well, there you go. Then.
And he got sued for the school fees. I mean, it's just, and we had such a hard time getting the courts to actually just a basic principle. Hey, this was the agreement. She took the money. She just, for 2 years, forgot to tell us that she wasn't using it for the school. Then she and the school wanted to sue us for the shortfall. Okay.
So let's talk about that, generally speaking. So the best interests of the child argument.
Section 7 of the Children's Act. Yeah.
Right. Now, when you look at jurisprudence and you look at legal precedent, what does the best interests of the child actually mean in reality?
In reality, it basically means if you take a day in the life of the child, what time the child wakes up, what the child does during the day, who they spend their time with, what school they go to, and in case of emergency, what kind of medical treatment would be available to them, those kind of things, who paints the best picture. However, that's what it's supposed to be. Yeah. It isn't, even if the mother paints a far less rosy picture, the courts are so heavily in favor of them. But, it's Section 7 of the Children's Act, and this comes from a case with Judge...
I hate that act.
Yeah.
It applies to medicine as well. I freaking hate it.
Yeah, no, Section 7. And this also comes from New Zealand. They've got all these ethereal principles and stuff there. But... And it's Section 7 is about 3 pages long. But what it's supposed to come down to is who can provide the child with the best stability, predictability, and who's less transient. How long has that father been employed at that job? What is the routine there for the children? How long has he been staying in that house? How close do they live to the grandparents, the support structure? Let's say he gets sick or has to travel for work. What happens then? Who has to look after the children? So you've got to sort of sketch that day in the life picture to the court. But it goes down to the principles. If I can sort of drill down and get principles out of there, it's stability and predictability. Those are even though it sounds very, very boring, those are the conditions that children flourish in the best, where they know what tomorrow will bring. Even though they may not like it, they may find it boring, but they know tomorrow morning I get up at 6 o'clock. I have breakfast at sort of this time, and then I go for a shower. Then the driver comes and takes us to school. Then I have extramurals. Then I get picked up by X. Then I go home. Dad picks me up because his office is at home. Then I do this. Then I have to do homework. Then at 7:30 or 6 o'clock I have supper, and 8 o'clock is 7 o'clock is bath time, and 8 o'clock I have to go to bed. That sort of predictability, those environments is what children flourish in, where they know what the next day is bringing, where they don't lie awake and what house are we going to live in tomorrow? Do we have a house tomorrow? Are we going to have food? Who is going to be mom's new boyfriend? Is he okay? Is he going to be nice to me? Is he going to hurt my sister?
Or dad's
where they don't have
girlfriend.
to, where they don't have to worry about those things which a lot of people take for granted. So the principles that can crystallize out of that is predictability, reliability, consistency. And that's the applications where I am successful. It's transient versus non-transient nature of what we can offer the children.
Right. So to look at those principles. So I mean, in your everyday practice, the example that you spoke about earlier, where if the mother or the father finds someone on the internet and they want to move to New York City with the child, but the other parent is staying in South Africa because they have a job and things like that.
Yes.
How will the court look at that? And will it look at it differently if it was the mother wanting to do it or the father wanting to do it?
Well, if I start with your last question, yes, absolutely. If it's the mother that wants to do it, and she's a custodial parent, she will have an easier time than if the father wants to do it and he's a custodial parent. Once again, maternal preference. Maternal preference getting confused with what's the best interest of the child. What will the courts look at? Well, there's a New Zealand case about the Chief Justice in New Zealand who sits and he puts this out quite well. And it's actually quite an emotional case. I get emotional when I read it. In New Zealand, they have a lot of problems between New Zealand and Australia. What we're talking about, somebody meeting somebody over the internet in New Zealand or Australia and wanting to relocate. Now, it's not that far. It's hop over the pond. But where the father can now see the children every day, he can now see them once every 4 to 5 months. Same as, let's say, we live up here in Johannesburg and the woman wants to relocate to Durban or to Cape Town. The courts are much more inclined to grant it to a woman than they are to a man, but I get quite successful in stopping it. I'm not saying to the women, don't go live over there, but go live over there, but just keep in mind, there's a lot of wishful thinking you have to do here. Let's say you go live in Canada. Who's to say your child won't get bullied at school? You're just assuming because there's no crime in Canada or less crime, the child won't get bullied. The child won't meet the wrong people and won't get involved in drugs. There's all this wishful thinking. The child will be happy. The child will fit in. The child will have a better life. Truth is, the child hasn't got a bad life here. He has his family, his grandparents, his support structure, and his friends. You're ripping that out from under him. More than that, you're asking that person over there, the father, to hug a webcam. Is that something you would agree to? Tell me, madam. Would you hug a webcam if it was for your child's best interest? Then they start thinking. Then I say to the court, who here, all of you are parents, who here would hug a webcam? Yet that's what you're asking my client to do. On all this wishful thinking that the child won't get bullied, the child won't run with the wrong crowd, the child will fit in, that the person they're shacking up with is not a pedophile or an alcoholic. They're never going to admit it, but let's say they are. What about that person's friends that the child's going to be introduced to? How are you to say that those people are not going to take advantage of the child? So there's all these boxes that you're ticking based on this wishful thinking that Canada, wherever, or Australia is the land of milk and honey. It's not. People have problems there like they do here. There are pedophiles, drugs, wrong crowd, bullying, same as there are here. Yet you're now saying this child will go there, have the rug ripped out from under them and not be vulnerable. That's not the way it works. There are armies of predators who work in schools, in church choirs, who prey on those children, who watch out for them, who will win their confidence. And you are now saying, but in your case, this is not going to happen. Then I ask the person, but madam, is this person truly in love with you? Yes, no, they are. So why don't they come live here? Why is this application not about their children? Why must you go there? Why don't they come here? So then we sort of reach some sort of compromise. Like the mother can go, but she goes for a year. Because a lot of times the relationship doesn't work out in the first year and the mom ends up coming back. So we say to her, go for a year.
With the kids or without?
Without. Go for the children, go for a year, establish yourself. Let's see if it really is the land of milk and honey. And then we have this application again.
So using women examples quite a lot, and
I've never had an example. Okay, now I also represent women who want to go, but I've never had an example because so few fathers are granted custody, and so few fathers are willing to relocate their whole lives for somebody, a knight in shining armor that they've met on the internet. I've never had a father wanting to do that. I'm representing women right now who want to go. And I'm representing fathers right now who are trying to stop them, but I've never had a situation where the father wants to relocate with the children. I may have one coming up, though, funny enough. But this case, the father is already staying in Canada, has been staying in Canada for some time, is settled there. And the children, which are now of sort of a teenage age, want to go and live with the father. So slightly different. It's not him putting the rug out from under them. It's the children saying, hey, man, we've been to Canada a couple of times. It's a pretty cool place. We like the neighborhood. We've made friends there.
A couple of things. On the maintenance stuff, you mentioned how it works, and it's all great.
That's supposed to work.
Yeah, I mean, the law is wonderful because it has all this lovely writing in lots of volumes of books, and it all looks great, and it all seems to work just fine, and then life happens. So, maintenance happens, and you work all that out, but people's lives change. They get raises, they change jobs, some people get promotions, they change circumstances. The kid was doing 2 extramurals last year. This year they're doing 4, 2 of which are far more expensive. All of these things change, and initial sort of agreements don't necessarily apply even as early as a year later, as they did. And I think that seems to be an issue in a lot of divorces. Is initially there's some sort of agreement between the parents, which seems to work, and then circumstances change over time. And suddenly, whether it be, let's go, I want to take the kids overseas because that's where my new boyfriend is. But even smaller stuff, like I want to move a little bit further away, I'm going to change the kids' school. Or, as I say, the amount of money I require to look after the children, be it the father or the mother, is more, or actually the amount is actually less, but that's not being declared, so that money is being sort of taken. I've heard divorced parents of both genders sort of say things like, screw him or screw her, I'm going to, I get a little bit extra out of the deal every month and I'm going to keep it type of thing. Do you deal a lot with that? Is there a revisiting, or does that just end up being kind of the chaos that happens between divorced parents and the sort of animosity that often builds?
Jonathan, change circumstances is the reality of life because people are becoming much more mobile. Sort of the transient nature of things, of relationships, of car ownership, of property ownership, of everything, of even raising children. It's become very transient. Things that were quite set. That this is, if you look at my grandfather probably when he was growing up had a choice of 7 women in the small town in the Karoo where he lived. And of 3 of them were directly related to him. Yeah. So, and now I can be married to somebody, sit in the bedroom, and be communicating with 7 other women at the same time in a way that would be considered inappropriate. So, the playing field has massively changed. So, change circumstances is a real issue, and the agreement that you settled now on in court and was made in order of court. Certainly, you can lose a job, you can gain a job, who knows what can happen to you. You can win the lotto or not win it, but things can change very, very quickly for you, and your financial circumstances can change very quickly for the better or for the worse. Divorce settlement and the parenting plan worth its salt should have an alternate dispute resolution in it, which means if you guys get a dispute or you can't agree on something where she says, I want more money because of this, or you saying, I now have to pay less because I lost my job, maintenance will be part of that parenting plan. But so should an alternate dispute resolution where before you litigate, you must mediate. Right. And there are organizations which are like the Gauteng Family Law Forum, which the lawyers have gotten together because the field of specialist divorce lawyers is small. Even though there's a lot of lawyers in this town, it's a really ugly area of law, and not many people want to practice it. It's really it's emotionally draining. It's bitter. People really come to you when they are down and out, and if you lose a case or lose someone's right to see their children, they may very well go home and shoot themselves. It does happen, and you sit with that on your hands. So they are and as just to come in, clients often say, "Oh, I want to see blood on the walls," and they want to use the court system to exact revenge.
Yeah.
And I say to them, "That's fine. Just know it's going to be the blood of your children." And then they suddenly start changing the tune. So there are organisations out there like the Gauteng Family Law Forum, where the specialist matrimonial attorneys, or at least a lot of them, get together every now and then. And they've taken an arm's length agreement to not inflame a situation, to look after the weak parties in the equation, which is the children, to, when there are children involved, to not take on a matter unless there's been mediation, unless there's a failed mediation, to then only proceed to litigation, where they will absolutely try and keep those aspects out of court, where the children are used as a football, where the children are used to trade up or down, or whatever the case may be, or the process involving the children is used to exact revenge and punishment on the other person. So there's a new way of doing things, and we've seen that movement all over the world, the Fathers for Justice movement, or all that. It's just what it comes down to is people are tired of being treated unfairly. People are tired of the children, the weakest link in the equation, being used to exact revenge. Parties being denied access and or frustrated in their access to their children. And I've seen fathers do this to mothers too, by the way. Yeah, I'm not getting down on mothers. Yeah, I can tell you, I've seen fathers do despicable things. Fathers who have custody of the children, now it's a mother's time with the children, they will now take an extramural in that time, not because it's an extramural the child wants to do, but it would frustrate the mother and take away the quality of her time with the child. Now the mother has to drive to who knows where on her weekend because the child is now playing hockey. The child doesn't want to play hockey, but she now has to go sit, drive the child there, take the child back. And it was done for no other reason than the father's enjoying the fact that the mother's getting frustrated in her access to the children. You know it hurts her.
Yeah, that's despicable.
This was the other, the second thing I wanted to get to, which is custody. So when it's smaller kids, it's obviously a discussion between parents, and it's deciding on stability and predictability, as you mentioned. The courts do seem to favour mothers. That's just a historical thing, and fine. What happens when kids are old enough to kind of make reasonable decisions? And I would say as early as probably 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, probably know who they would prefer to stay with, can give some sort of justified reasons. Now, those reasons can obviously be argued with. They're children, so they may not be the best idea. You know, dad's got the most number of Xbox games, and therefore I want to stay with him is not a good argument. But there may often be good reasons why kids want to do that. And does the court take that into account?
Jonathan, absolutely. But it's also a fine line, like you say. You know, children can be bribed, and children can play parents up against each other. But Section 10 of the Children's Act, it's called child participation, and here's what it says. Every child that is of such an age, maturity, and stage of development as to be able to participate in any matter concerning that the child has a right to participate in, and this comes down to the custody issue, who they want to live with, in an appropriate way, can participate and express their views in an appropriate way and must be given due consideration. So the older the child gets, the more they get a voice. And you had a pretty good, I think, instinctive feel from it. It sort of gets to the teen and preteen phase, the 10, 11, 12 from there. If the child then says, but I want to go live with the other parent, it has to be listened to. And if it doesn't get listened to, then you end up in court. And the deciding factor then quite often is, and the family advocate will look at this, or we'll appoint a curatrix for the child, an attorney for the child, which is independent of either of us. And that person will sit with the child and will interview the child and will come to a conclusion, deliver a report and says, but this child really, really does want to go live with the father. And they're supposed to sort of drill down into the facts and see why. A lot of times that seed gets planted by the other parent, but there also comes a time eventually. Look, we are mammals, and I can tell you something about the mammals, whether you're a penguin or a lion, at some stage you rebel against the central authority and you get kicked out. Now, I've seen situations where we were involved in a ridiculous custody battle that's been raging for years, but the sons have now gotten physically bigger than the mother, and the mother says, give me your cell phone, and she catches the child on the wrong day. The son's testicles are now producing testosterone. They're aggressive, they're angry, and the mother tries to take the phone, and the child pushes the mother and says, that day is when the mother even though you're involved in a custody dispute, will pack the child's bags, deliver him to the father, and say, try that with your father. So at some stage, as a mammal, girls rev their mothers, boys rev their mothers or their fathers. You rebel, or the grandparents rebel against the central authority. And that's often the stage that the child then goes to live with the other parents, who then has a firmer hand. That happens a lot of times. And I've seen that happen in custody disputes, where the mother physically packs the child's clothes, say, go try that with your father.
Yeah.
So we have a fair idea of what custody and maintenance looks like. Excuse me. In South Africa. So the law says one thing, but in practice, there's an instinct, there's a bias towards mothers in early life, and later in life, it's a little bit more up in the air.
Yes.
Is there anything in your practice that shows things are changing slowly? Because this idea of mediation before litigation, I think, is a vitally important one. Because I think that the power of the courts and the influence of the courts should be diminished, generally speaking. It should only be last resort. But mediation and alternative dispute resolutions, things like that, should actually be much more preferred.
Well, in places
parties.
like New Zealand, and coming back to here's a point I wanted to make earlier, before I forget. We're talking about, here's a judge that sat in this, Chief Justice of New Zealand, who sat in this matter where the father tried to stop the mother from going to Australia with the children. And he said, what is the court to do? Here you have both parents who are both good people and who both believe they're doing the right thing. The mother genuinely believes she can have a better life, and a better life for children, better income prospects in Australia. The father genuinely believes the children will be unhappy there and they should remain here. And the court said, what are we to do? I'm sitting here, and the judgment that I give is going to shatter someone. And that's where the court came with the thing. Told the mother, go, but go for a year first to see if it works out. And then we can talk about it again. Now, you can have liberal visitations with your children, but if you're so set on going, go there, become established first. See if the relationship is indeed what you think it should be. And not all this milk and honey, and get a more realistic view of what you're in for there. I don't know what the conclusion of the case was, but it certainly, I think there was a more pragmatic approach. He wasn't saying don't take the children, he's just saying don't take them now. Let's phase it in. Let's start with them being there for 2 weeks. Let's jack it up to a month and focus on maybe them starting the new school year there. But let's not say one day you're here and the next day you're there and you have a new life. It's going to be too much, too soon. And give an adjustment period for all, which I thought was a really pragmatic approach. I don't know what the end of it was, but that seemed to me the more pragmatic approach. Now, coming back to your question, you asked that.
So the question about using mediation and alternative dispute resolution rather than just going straight to trial at court. Is that a relatively new thing that's come into the system? And is it, to me, it seems preferable if people can have dialogue first for months if needed before anything becomes an order of court?
You know what, I prefer 4 months of dialogue versus 6 years of acrimonious and expensive litigation, in which the children are destroyed. The parties are destroyed. Here you are. Firstly, is it a new thing? No, it's not a new thing. It's becoming more and more prominent. And certainly worldwide. There's a worldwide movement. In court cases, judgments are given, and especially in matrimonial matters, where the one party will be shattered when the judgment goes against them. You make someone very unhappy. So you cannot see your children this much. It must be supervised. Madam, you cannot now relocate to New York with you can relocate, but not with the children. These are hard, tough judgments. And if the parties have a way of sorting that out themselves without going through years of acrimonious, brutal, all-consuming litigation, which is extremely expensive, by the way. Plus, if you lose, you might get stumped with a cost order. If you can sit and have 4 months of discussions, which avoids that, and you go to court with an order by consent, which you both have come to an agreement on, one which is equally unpalatable to both of you. That's a sign of a good settlement. One where both parties are equally unhappy.
And that's been compromised.
You both have had to compromise. I'd much rather proceed on that basis than. And I always say to my client, I'm giving you advice here which is against my pocket. Where I make my money is fighting a matter for you in court. Now I'm giving you advice against that. I'm sending you. We have on our website certain mediators that we use, or that I use, depending on the level of acrimony between the parties. And these mediators are really, really good. They're specialist matrimonial attorneys. And I can tell you now, the one that I use a lot is Alan Jose. Phenomenal attorney, but a phenomenal mediator as well. I've had matters where I thought there is not a hope in hell that we're going to solve this matter. And he's managed to do it. I don't know how. I don't know what he gives them to drink or what.
Let's just drill down into mediation a bit more.
Yes.
What is it? Is it coming
Okay, if I
across
can,
the table, legal parties, and then just hammering out something?
I can start by telling you what it's not. A lot of people confuse mediation with arbitration. Arbitration is pretty much like a court case, where you sit and you present your case, and the arbitrator makes a judgment. Mediation is not that at all. Mediation is where you sit and you see these are the issues in dispute. I want to see the children I want, for instance, to see the children. I want to pick them up on the Monday afternoon in school, and I want to drop them off on the following Monday morning, 1 week rotating. The mother says, you're not a good parent. You can see them every alternate weekend like a normal divorced father and one sleepover during the week. So that's the issue in dispute. And then related to that is maintenance. Of course, if you have 1 week rotating, then there should be no consumables payable. Because, they're going to spend the same at each, they're going to eat and drink and whatever. At the
Equal
same
amounts.
in equal amounts. So that takes the cash payment away. And some people, times that's the reason why the person don't want 1 week rotating. I can tell you that straight away. It's for the money, honey, or the money they're going to lose. Mm-hmm. And in these tight circumstances, that's a real consideration. It's not because the person's shallow, it's because they're desperate. So then you just have to sort out the meds and aids, which is fairly easy. But so now you go into mediation, you sit in front of a mediator and you say, this is what I want, and the mediator tries to have you guys reach a compromise. And what happens then is you either get a certificate of failed mediation, or you have your issues in dispute and you say, right, the mediator successfully mediated on that point and you came to this agreement. Successfully mediated on that point, came to this agreement, that point is still in dispute. You then have a document which you can refer to. Now, the mediation is without prejudice. What is said in that mediation can't be referred to. So you can really, the court process also does not allow people to vent. You can't say, let's say somebody had an affair, a long-standing affair with your best friend, and you're the last person to find out. You're deeply hurt about that. The court process never allows you to say, I'm so disappointed in you. When I married you, not in a million years did I think this would happen. And a lot of times people get trapped in that anger. And unless they have that resolved, they're always looking backwards. You said, she said, he said. What the divorce process is supposed to do, or the parenting plan and the settlement agreement, is to structure things going forward. It's very hard to drive in a car if you're looking in the rearview mirror all the time. You're going to continuously crash. The mediation process, even if it's not successful, allows you to vent, to say how disappointed, how hurt, how angry you are. And a lot of times, even if the mediation itself isn't successful, getting past that emotional bottleneck, a month or two down the line, will lead to a settlement.
So, so it could be more of a psychological exercise for some people than try to solve the problem.
So the mediator doesn't make a judgment. He helps the parties, or tries to assist the parties to come to a compromise. He notes what that compromise is, whether and which points they were successful or not, and that, if nothing else, narrows the issues in dispute. That if you're going to go to court, you're only going to go, for instance, on who gets the house. The rest has been sorted out. So that's the only issue that's left in dispute. There were 6 issues that you were disagreement on, now there's 1. So that cuts down the litigation time by about a year. And you have a very narrow issue that you're going to fight on. And you can possibly get divorced now, and that leaves that for later determination.
Okay, we've spoken. I assume you're dealing with sort of middle class to upper class parents,
Yes.
people who have, the money to come to a lawyer in the first place.
I run a business, not a charity.
Yeah, perfectly happy with that. Just your insight into the problem we have with fathers, actually, in South Africa, which and in some parts of the world, but certainly South Africa is a major issue. Ramon alluded to it earlier. So, in many cases, so in middle class families, I think the reason they're middle class, there's actually data for this. If you want to enter the middle class, you've got to do 3 things, right? This is United States stuff, but it should translate into most societies. You've got to finish school. So you've got to matriculate, get a job, any job. It can literally be flipping burgers at McDonald's, and you've got to get married before you have kids. That's you do those 3 things, you'll end up in the middle class in the United States, and ostensibly in any sort of Western setup kind of society. So in this sort of split world we have in South Africa, probably work the same kind of
except the marriage before children will not work. Yeah. Most people in customary unions,
yes,
which is becoming quite popular, or not quite popular, but which I deal with more and more now in my practice. Most instances, they have 1, 2, if not 3 children before the marriage concluded.
Yeah. All right. So, which is
that's just a matter of timing.
Potentially an issue. Anyway, I think it's an issue because marriage is a commitment thing, and unless you've committed, and sometimes it's about literally signing an actual document, but it's also about a mental sort of bridge, especially for men who are not evolutionarily speaking committal creatures. It's if you don't make the commitment, then you never really have that. Then it's just that little bit easier to dump your life and move on to something else, which we see men do, I think, more commonly than women, in terms of abandoning kids and families and moving to new lives and things like that. What's your insight though on sort of the huge fathering problem we have,
or the lack thereof?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, we've got lots of single mothers, and they're single mothers because the father has impregnated the mother and then done nothing about his responsibility.
Yes, the call it the deadbeat dad syndrome, or fathers that don't pay maintenance and all that. Look, a lot of it's got to do with how labor movements were previously worked. Somebody would be from KwaZulu-Natal, there wouldn't be work, they'd come and work up in the mines here. He'd have a family in KwaZulu-Natal and a family up here because he'd spend 9 months of the year there and 3 months of the year over there. So he'd literally have fathers, children and fathers, or one person having 2 families. Tie that in with accepted polygamy, which then is almost an excuse for being an absent father, or an absent father at least part of the time to some of the children in another province.
Sure.
So a lot of it's got to do with how labor used to move around in the country and what became such acceptable norm then, and is to an extent still an acceptable norm now. And on top of that, you've got a lot of people from the previous generation, probably myself included, which because of what happened and what they were asked to do, or are damaged goods. So you've got a lot of people with, I'd say, post-traumatic stress syndrome in one form or another, migrant labor, being absent, being forced to be absent against their will, and that has created almost a funny social undercurrent, which almost excuses men's bad behavior to a certain extent. But that's changing now. That is changing. I see a lot of men, and this is from Indian to black to white men who are insisting on playing a more involved role in their children's lives, irrespective of whether they were married to the mother or not. That is a real undercurrent that I'm seeing, that guys are going, hey man, these are my children, they're not going to call someone else father. I'm stepping up to the plate. I will not be relegated. I will not be made a second-class citizen in their life. And the stats for me are equal amongst the races. It's not a white, a black, or an Indian thing. I have men are standing up and saying, you know what, my children deserve to have me in their life.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. Yeah. I hope that's an increasing trend.
Absolutely.
I just want to make a point, though, about the previous point about masculinity generally and absenteeism as a father. I think those 2 points might be related in a stronger way than we think, because if it depends on the mindset of what masculinity is. If it's the pioneer who does what he wants, who impregnates whoever they want, and spreads his seeds and then goes on to the next one, that idea of masculinity is toxic, as people would call it. But if masculinity is about taking responsibility, it could prevent further fatherlessness in society, generally speaking, if that makes sense. So arguably, and I don't know if you ever thought about this argument, if you are standing up for fathers in a court of law and they are able to actually win, maybe fathers will not be absent, generally speaking, because now they actually have a chance to win. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, will you get involved in a race where you know you're going to lose and it's going to cost you huge amounts of money, you're going to be strapped with a cost order? Probably not.
It's probably easy just to dump.
Could you use that as a reason not to do it at all? Absolutely. Certainly it's justifiable. It's like somebody, look, everything in life is good and bad. I can have a vehicle. I can transport people to the hospital with it, or I can use it to plow through a crowd. I can have a gun, which I can use to defend somebody or protect my property, and I can be a crazy psycho and shoot children with it. Same with the masculinity. You can have a sort of a John Wayne masculinity where you cowboys don't cry. However, you stand firm on your principles, you fight for them, and you're present in your children's lives. even sometimes if you don't want to be there. It's masculinity. You can be masculine despite yourself. You don't have to use it as an excuse to be a loser or a deadbeat. You can be man enough to actually be in your children's lives. And what does that sort of masculinity mean? I think Jordan Peterson refers to that a lot, where he talks about it's masculinity despite yourself. That you do things because it's the right thing to do, not because it's convenient. And a lot of times, like the best interest of the child that gets confused with, or the tender years principle and the maternal preference that gets confused with the best interest of the child, a lot of times I think masculinity gets used as an excuse for dads to be losers.
Yes.
It just depends on how you look at it, what your mindset is. Masculinity, as a matter of fact, it can be used for you to step up to the plate and be the man that you deserve to have, be the father you deserve to have as a child growing up, not necessarily the one you had. But it depends on what your definition of masculinity is. Yeah. Masculinity can also be you go out, get drunk, and come home and beat the you-know-what out of your wife. Both can say, well, I'm just being a man. So it depends on your view of masculinity, the example that's been set to you, and both can be good and bad. And there is asymmetry and a toxicity in both. Depends how it's used.
Yeah. Well, just my argument is that if fathers can win in custody and marital battles,
you might get more fathers
as seen as equal parents to the mother, the bias that no longer really exists. There's probably more reason to take responsibility of fatherhood.
Absolutely.
Before.
Well, there's less reasons not to put it that way. Put it in the negative. Your excuses are running out, mate. We are winning.
Yeah.
Right. And that makes sense. All right.
I want to get something. It's more of a philosophical and a thought experiment than anything else. I'm sure you haven't come across this, but we worldwide, America seems to be the sort of, America is like the bulkhead of progress in terms of political progressivism. I don't mean in progress in technology or anything else. And so the crazy ideas that come from, and the progressive movement is the far left. The crazy ideas.
By that you mean the liberal movement?
So, I mean, the Americans would call it liberals. What are liberals now? I don't like to use the term liberals because it has different meanings. In South Africa, I don't have problems with liberals generally. We might disagree on some things because I'm more classical liberal, and liberal is getting perverted by the American meaning of that word. Because really, the founding fathers, for example, in America, were liberals
for their time. Absolutely.
They
were radical.
So the term liberal it's a problem because people don't understand what liberal actually means. But there is there's a sort of crisis point that's coming in the United States, and because we copied the Constitution from Canada, it will come here as well, about abortion. And that is that, so for a long time, once abortion was legalized in the US and in several places in Europe, what you had was this kind of tacit acceptance, which Hillary Clinton actually originally called that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. And most people sort of were able to swallow that. So there were obviously the sort of evangelicals and very religious people on the right who were like, I can't swallow that at all. It shouldn't happen. But the majority of people, myself included, were of the belief that, and this is borne out by stats, were of the belief that yes, we don't love abortion. It's not this amazing thing, but sometimes it's a necessity. Sometimes it's something that's got to happen. If it does happen, we should allow for it to take place, but under certain circumstances. And our Constitution, for example, or our law makes it very clear what the guidelines are there in terms of the weeks and whatever. The Americans have gone absolutely insane, and I mean on the left-hand side of the aisle. They've gone insane recently, and they've now, instead of making abortion safe, legal, and rare, as Hillary Clinton would put it, they've gone abortion anytime you like, and they have movements like Shout Your Abortion, which is a way of celebrating abortion, and they have even legalized what's called late-term abortion, which is, and in a state like New York, for example, abortion till birth. So in other words, if you are pregnant, 38 weeks pregnant, and any woman who's been 38 weeks pregnant can tell you they are very much carrying a fetus, which is a baby. It's a living being. They will allow you to walk into an abortion clinic in the state of New York, and they will allow you to abort that baby.
Yes.
And kill that baby. And so this is now where the argument is reversing, and I think they're losing the battle. And you're even seeing it in the Democratic primary. Sorry, I know this is long, Ramon, but I just need to give the background. I know you need to go as well.
Yes.
But you even see it in the Democratic primaries where you have some candidates saying, look, we need to have a big tent where we have people who both are pro-choice and pro-life are being allowed to be Democrat voters. And you have people like Bernie Sanders going, no, you are either pro-choice or you're not a Democrat. Right. So we have that situation. What I think is going to ultimately happen is you now have men turning around and going, that is not your decision to make just because it's your body, because it's my offspring. Yes. And I'm interested to see from a legal perspective, and as I say, thought experiment, where this goes and whether we end up at a constitutional court, whether it be the Supreme Court in the United States, whether it be the constitutional court here, where a woman wants to abort a pregnancy. We take it to this extreme of first. You have to take it to the extreme where they can abort till birth. And then a man goes, actually, that is not just your decision to make because I have ownership as well.
You know what, there I agree with you. And the law has had a very clever way of dealing with that, but I'll tell you how I would argue that case. If I was like for the man trying to stop the abortion. In law, there's called a thing called the nasciturus fiction. And Roman knows this as well as I do.
First day of law school.
Yes. Where the baby, once it is the umbilical cord between the mother and the child is cut, then the child gets all these rights, the right to life. So let's say killing and aborting a baby is not murder, but killing a baby after the cord has been cut is murder. And there could be seconds between that, by the way. But obviously now I'm not taking in the late-term pregnancy and all that. I'm just sort of brushing it over. But, of course, now it's a fiction because the argument is, at what stage did you start being you? Go back into your development. You started being you when that gamete, when that egg cell met the sperm cell. That's when you started being you. There's no point that you say, oh, at 7 months I started, or at 7 days, or at 8 days, or at 38 weeks I started being me. No. You started being you from the very moment that egg cell got fertilized. So there is a human being in the making. You can't say it's only started at week so, or because the brain activity started there, or you moved a pinky, now you're human. Not true. You started being you as from day one, as from inception. That's when your progression started. So if I was to argue the case that the man should have a say in it, yes, the court will probably impose a time limit on it, very similar to when you're allowed to, let's call it, not late-term abortions, but abortion before that. They've got certain week, parameter this week, that week, and after that you need special permission.
Before 20 weeks.
So I would use that argument. I would also use the argument that from that moment, and based on, coming back to nasciturus fiction, is you have all these rights that accrue to you, but now the mother can also claim maintenance for lay-in in the hospital. Now that's before the child was born, but it's child maintenance. So that fiction has, in other acts, a terugwerkend, a retrospective.
Yeah, backworking, yeah.
Yeah, so you can use that very retrospective aspect that you have, for instance, in the Maintenance Act and what the mother can charge for. It's child maintenance, but it's lay-in hospital before the child was born. Why can't you not use that retrospective thing in the father's right into when, in certain cases, he may stop abortion? What would those cases be? We say, right, if the mother doesn't want that, that's fine, but when the child is born, I'll take that child. I'll be the father. I'll step up. It'll be my child.
Imagine the counter argument is going to be that the mother is, the carrying vessel. So she's the one, carrying the child. And so, this is the big abortion debate, really, is does the mother have ultimate rights? Because at the end of the day, she is the container, right? And so therefore, she can decide whether she wants to contain that particular fetus or not.
Except when it comes to surrogacy. How come it works there, but not for natural?
Well, I think, and that's a very good point that Roman makes. I think being the vessel should certainly give you more sway. But does it mean the father should have no say? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
We have a constitution that says you cannot discriminate based on sex. Well, what are we doing here? Oh, you're the father. Sorry, you can't say anything. Why? Well, because the mother is the carrier. Sure, the mother is the carrier. She was there when it was being made. So was I. And if she doesn't want the child, I'll take it. And do I need to then maybe compensate her for the fact that the lost income or the hospital bill? Sure, why not? But there's arguments to be made both ways. But I think just because of the asymmetry that's there, because she is the carrier, that asymmetry does not mean that the father should have no say. Absolutely not.
I'm really looking forward to the day when a father takes that sort of
Yeah,
argument.
that's-
And hopefully
That's what
I'll,
I'm
really
asking,
interested. I've always
yeah.
been interested in what are the father's
well,
rights.
hopefully I'll be the guy doing that arguing because
Well-
I'll win that case.
So if someone wants to do this, Shando, where can they find you?
www.divlaw.co.za or on my phone 082 819 5675. Try do it during office hours, please. I have a life too.
Yeah, and the haters, don't scam him, man.
Yeah, don't let the haters spam you.
Yeah.
Mr. Theron,
Hello.
baie dankie meneer.
Baie groot
This was really illuminating. Enjoyed it thoroughly. And people like you with this sort of expertise, you need to do your own podcast, my friend. 'Cause
Yeah, I've
there's
been
a
working
wealth of value to give to the rest of the country.
You know, it's always a question of affordability. I spoke to somebody about it recently and they said 10 grand. I said, 10 grand, are you stupid? But anyway, we'll see what happens.
Awesome. Thank you. As always, the Renegade Report, you can find Ramon at Roman Kabanak on Twitter, myself at Jonathan_Witt. The Twitter account is at Renegade_Report, renegadereport.co.za. You can go there, find all the shows, support us should you wish to do so. And as always, thank you for listening or watching. We really appreciate it. We'll catch you next time. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.